Okay, good morning, everyone. So today is the second part of the chapter on patience. And as I was thinking about patience, well, I'm learning to be patient with my inability to be patient. As might be Reb's way, one way he would say that. Um, it's also, like kind of the ability to delay our gratification. When we want something, we want to get away from something. We're looking for some type of gratification. And instead of trying to self-consciously satisfy that desire, to just be with that desire to get some type of gratification without allowing the expression of its fullness, so and allowing it to change or flow by, dissolve, as everything always does. And so in Buddhist practice, I think the practice of patience inspires us to not limit the free expression of our life force, by trying to control our experience, which we learned from Kuang Roshi. And then gradually, our experience and our activity is no longer so much experienced as something outside, but more and more experienced as Buddha's great compassion living through us. So, we get more energy from our commitment to our Bodhisattva vow by practicing patience, and, prepares us for the heroic effort of the fourth paramita that comes, in acting in accord with our aspiration for saving all beings from suffering. So it feels good to be in accord with that. And I'm, to the extent that I'm able to be more patient with myself and others, I get more of that joyful feeling of acting in accord with that vow, And then I'm also reminded here, I think maybe it was in the first part of the chapter, but Reb quotes the jewel mirror samadhi, that grasping and turning away are both wrong, for it's like a massive fire. Buddhas learned to patiently sit at the downtown of suffering, not in the suburbs. He didn't say that in this chapter, but he said that many times in some of his books. So we developed a capacity to open to boundless suffering, and this capacity, he does say, is the perfection of patience. So to live on the path of Buddhas, we need to let go of our fears of our personal lives and of not being in control, and of realizing that fear distracts us from our vow to be compassionate. So patience does naturally follow the first two paramitas. So in generosity, we learn to welcome what comes and to offer all of our experience as a gift. And then in ethics, give attention to being upright and careful in all of our actions. And so those two support us in being patient in all the different aspects of our life. And it opens us to the way to the depth of the intimacy that we share with all beings. So learn to be present with pain and to be focused and undistracted in the presence, in that moment of pain, that is patience. And we can learn to be tolerant of pain that way and keep our heart open simultaneously. And that really helps to dissolve our fear. And it also gives us the energy for deeply exploring our experience, which I think we need to do in Buddhist practice. Exploring, the willingness to explore our actual experience of thinking and feeling and suffering, as well as joy, so that through that practice and through that process, we learn to receive joyful energy from our essential being. And that's what we really need before we're ready to really practice the joyful effort of the next paramita. So when feeling pain, in the specific part of our body, we can be present, learn to be present with the sensations and explore them. And, Reb says in many different parts of his teaching that, our painful sensations are beings in themselves, They don't have own being, but they are beings, so we can consider them beings. And they're calling for compassion and patience from us. So learning to be patient with our resistance to being intimate with the truth of impermanence is another big, probably maybe the most important, or one of the most important aspects of the practice of patience. And so then he goes on and talks about patience with our fear of ultimate truth and of no separate self, and of loss of everything dear to our sense of a separate self. And I had a kind of a funny moment. I was visiting some friends up in Asheville this weekend, and they're longtime Buddhist practitioners also. And in their bathroom, they had this little frame saying in it, and it goes, "It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me." And I thought, that's so cute, you know? No matter where we are on the path, it's like, I just keep reminding myself, I've always been looking for this me, you know, trying to label it, describe it, express it, and most importantly, defend it and enhance it and protect it and all that. But I never found it. And then, you know, just that little saying reminded me, like, wow, we spent all this time trying to do all these things, being so concerned and totally caught up in this sense of me. And I guess that's sort of the ultimate joke that Reb talked about at the end of part of this chapter. Part of the ultimate joke, a big part, maybe the most important part of the ultimate joke, that we spend our whole lives looking for something that we've never found, or trying to protect and enhance and defend and be afraid of losing something we've never found, you know. So anyway, when we begin to kind of learn to be patient with ourselves in that process that I'm describing here, you know, we begin to have the freedom to enter the heart of intimacy, which is the recognition of our shared being. And patience allows wholehearted acceptance of our intimacy with all things, he says. We learn to respond to life from the heart of the wholeness and center of our life. You know, and you can think of that as, I think of it as like the current in the ocean. Like the current is totally blended in with the ocean. It's the same substance with the ocean. It's made of this, you know, water. And the current is actually the activity of the ocean. So all of our experience, in that metaphor, all of our experience is the activity of the universal being, like Suzuki Roshi says. We're the activity of all beings together, and we're always already totally blended in with the cosmos, you know. And, you know, and that was Buddha's, and that Buddha's main expression, his real powerful expression at his great enlightenment, was I and all beings simultaneously attain the way. So in dealing with the intimacy, with our resistance to the intimacy of being at the center of our life, that is our resistance to being patient. And so if we can begin to let that dissolve, you know, we enter that freedom, he says, of being fully ourselves as Buddha, which is deepest intimacy, the deepest intimacy with our essential being. And there's a little part on page 62 I wanted to read here. He says, it's often hard to be present when we're close to feeling intimacy in our relationships. We may be concerned with whether others approve of us or not. In such a situation, we need to take care of our wish for approval so that we don't lean away from the center of the experience of intimacy. As we develop our ability to be present with the challenges of actualizing intimacy, we increase our ability to wholeheartedly and generously welcome our lives, and we are able to be more fully ourselves. Then we are also able to let go of ourselves and offer the gift of fearlessness to others, that they too can be fully themselves. In this way, patience enhances our generosity. You know, and it's been my experience, and then all the years I spent, studying therapy and being a therapist, realizing that we can fear opening our heart because in the past, particularly in childhood, we've had so many painful experiences where we felt rejected, a real painful rejection when we opened our heart. So we learned to keep closed that way, defensively. And being patient with our fears, staying present, we expand our capacity to stay at the center of our suffering and of our life. And the center is the heart of intimacy. That's the center of our life. In one of Reb's talks on YouTube recently, he mentioned, the 4 vows that we do at the end every time. And what he did was he didn't say we're going to change it, but he had a deep feeling of wanting to change the vow themselves to just, I vow to be intimate. In other words, sentient beings are numberless. Instead of saying, I vow to save them, just saying, I vow to be intimate for each of the 4. So that's how much importance he places on the practice of intimacy. And then one other thing I wanted to read. He says, those who sit patiently with their suffering, with birth and death, in the midst of birth and death, are allowed to laugh. Accepting the seriousness of samsara is a setup for the peaceful smile of nirvana. When we sit upright and patient in the midst of birth and death without wallowing in its gravity and seriousness, we can laugh at ourselves for missing that nirvana was always right here. To the extent that we're unwilling to be present and patient in the sufferings of birth and death, we are unable to understand that nirvana is here all the time. To the extent we are able to fully accept the suffering of samsara, we are able to see that it is nirvana itself. In that place, we are free to laugh or cry. And so then he talks somewhat about the patience of Buddhas. When learning to receive the great compassions of Buddhas, we are learning to be patient with our resistance to being patient. Our resistance is calling for compassion, and our suffering is also a gift. It's an expression of Buddha's compassion, drawing us into liberation from suffering. And I guess that's pretty much what I wanted to say, Stay open to receiving, and also being patient with our suffering is also the willingness to stay open to receiving the intensity of this suffering, which is actually drawing us in instead of us approaching the light. The light of our true natures draws us in through our suffering. That's a whole different talk, but we begin to feel the transforming power of that intensity. And Reb says that the light of our true nature is fully intimate with that intensity because it is that intensity. So we just stay open to that possibility. And so, thank you.
Thank you, Roger. I envy the life you've lived and the wisdom you come into close contact with, and all the moments you touched the heart of Buddhism in America. What a journey you've had. What a gift it is for us to have you as a sort of a footnote to the evolution of Buddhism in America here in this group. Sort of tied into all those West Coast things. It's just great for us. When I read this chapter, I was thinking too about this concept of fire, and it occurs to me is that with my own, I bring it back to myself all the time, unfortunately, but HADD, I was born impatient. I'm like really impatient. I'm horribly impatient, and that's my Buddha nature. My crazy impatience has been my power, and it's un-Buddhist. And I somehow have learned to sort of embrace that and live with that and be okay with that. But I have tried to be patient in my impatience. Be patient with my impatience has been the struggle for me, and the great gift of Buddhism for me is to think about that fact that I'm always rushing to improve things which can't be improved, change the world which can't be changed, and do things that can't be done. So, and I'm impatient to get going on these impossible tasks. So, for some reason, the concept of patience is at the heart of sort of my acceptance of my impatience. So I'm the ultimate bad Buddhist in every way. When I read the 8 vows every day, I say, man, I have not done well here. I'm not getting an A in this test, brother. But at the same time is it's what it is, So try to become accepting of that, and thinking about this. I'm teaching a course called The Beatles in the '60s at our local community college, and we do 1968. 1968, the world was changing a lot. That was the year that both Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy were killed. Nixon was elected president. There were riots in every city in America, and the forces of reaction really set in. And the forces of reaction was trying to set in against all the advances in civil rights and the peace movement. As those things got going, the force of reaction rolled up, and you had the hard hats versus sort of the hippies and the black nationalists, and they're going like this all the time. It occurred to me is that's what we have today. That's what worries us, We battle. 1960 was the same thing, Nixon, America for Americans, same idea, right? The people wanting peace and love and protesting for civil rights and things like this. The old song will not declare itself. So, and I'm impatient for justice. I'm impatient for social change, and that impatience is at my nature, and it's a crazy thing. And maybe it has some job to do in the world. So I'm trying to accept with patience my impatience, and the fact that the world is what it is, and will go on after I'm gone. And Old Man River will keep rolling long after I'm gone. After those who plant potatoes and cotton are no longer here.
Yeah. Thanks, Doc. That's great. It occurred to me, if we can be patient with the impossibility of it all, then we can learn to be intimate with the impossibility of it all. Also, 1968, I think that was the year Deborah was born. Is that right? Yeah.
Thank God, 1968 then.
Yeah.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Doc. And I can validate Doc's impatience, because it was a kind of a joke in the community that we used to live in Delray, because we would have parties, and Frank's one of those people that comes in to a party, and he'll come in the front door and greet and laugh, and pretty soon you hear uproarious laughter wherever he is. He's kind of like sprinkling mirth, throughout a gathering. But you can count on that it's almost like he walks in the front door and walks to the back door, and he's gone. So you have to catch him on the way through. It's rare that you get a sustained attentive focus with that. But I'm struck by the Enso, the Zen Enso, because it seems like everything keeps coming around again. Doc, you just alluded to 1968. My wife has just been reading Kristen, it's a book focused on Vietnam War nurses. And within that book, it really brings alive, from what she's saying and what friends have told me, 1968, Kristen Henna, I believe her name is, with that. But anyway, and I feel like so much of Zen is preparing us. It seems like we're the Paramitas in this book is preparing us for this inevitable recognition that there's nothing to prepare for. And it keeps coming around to that. And at the same time, right? At the same time, what it prepares for you for, what I feel it prepares you for is intimacy with that, and it's intimacy with the recognition that we're on quite a journey, again for a very limited period of time, and that making the most of that journey in terms of being nice to other people. I'm fascinated right now. There's a series of videos on TikTok where this guy goes around and he'll stop people while he's driving, and he'll be videoing them the whole time, and he ends up saying something nice to them. How beautiful they are, how handsome they are, how what a lovely couple you are. And I mean, he says positive things to people, and I'm telling you, it is like, it's addictive. And I say it to my wife all the time, because she sees me spending time on TikTok, watching like an hour's worth of videos. I love watching people be nice to each other. I love watching people smile. I love watching strangers break down. Doc's really good at this. For those of you who've been around him in social situations, he can walk into any room, and pretty soon, like I said, he'll have people smiling and laughing, because he touches something inside them where they're able to be friendly and to be open and to let their guard down. Everybody is so uptight, all the time in in supermarkets, in social gatherings, and to be able to be nice to people, I think to validate them and to validate their struggles, and to validate, to change the channel a little bit, where you touch in, I think, to that flow of life, I think is something I want to do, is something that I want to do. I think I did it my whole life in terms of doing psychotherapy, but at the same time, sharing it. I think sharing and living and embodying patience, and embodying connection, and embodying a sense of absurdity, but also the beauty and the truth. I think that emerges from our seeking with that. So, thank you.
Thank you all so much. So I love what you were saying at the beginning, Raj, about reminding us of how Reb has said that Buddhists sit in the downtown of suffering, not in the suburbs, and this whole notion of the fire and the heat. And I often have thought about my own personal journey, because I was born in May 1968, and I felt like I've been sitting in flames. And so when I started reading about the 60s and what was happening in May of 1968, and what my mother told me was going on as she drove to the hospital and all of this, I was like, God, that is independent of my story. I mean, it's part of the story, but this is the fire, the conditions of the world that we're born into. And I just love that quote that Claudette sent us from Earthland Manual, about how this is the purpose. This is why we practice. So it has that quote, and thinking that in a different way, I thought, all of these years that I just spent like sitting on my ass while my kid was, playing in the park, and I would, put it that way, just sitting on my butt on Saturday. What am I doing? Nothing. People would ask me, what are you doing? Nothing. Oh, wonderful. It felt wasteful in this world on fire. And so remembering, like, this is why we practice. And also this incredible thing about slowing down grind culture, because I have this like Doc kind of like impatience, because things are on fire and I want to find the hose, and I want to hose everything down quickly, and also just this gift of Zen, and particularly like what you were saying, Paul, about being around Frank. This was my experience actually. I've had this experience with Roger, I've had this experience with Red. And I used to think, oh, it's because they're retired. But now I realize, no, 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 no. It's something else going on here. So this notion of, and when Reb mentions that he says hello to a student, and the student, is so excited to see him that she doesn't show up for the interaction. Or he talks about, the little girl that was his daughter's friend, and she's so excited to see her dad because they're separated. She's longing for the mother, and when she's with the mother, she's longing for the father. So the whole interaction is missed. And there was this experience, and I still remember when I go to the grocery store. At that moment of interaction, when Buddha meets Buddha, and I stop the world, and the world stops because I give a word of kindness or a direct presence in a day of misery and germs and God knows what else they're dealing with. That whole notion of time and this notion of giving goes, how? And this moment, Viktor Frankl said it too, this moment, the space between the interaction or the thought and the reaction is this moment that goes poof, and it's like literally like a pound when I've been able to do it. But I've definitely seen Roger and I've definitely seen Red do it, and it morphs time. So I think that's the antidote. I realize there's an antidote to grind culture, and faster, and the more and more and all this. And I think it has to do with that very moment in which I can be intimate and I can give even like ugly stuff or unpleasant stuff. But if I check out because I'm afraid or I'm excited about the next situation or whatever, I'm not there to give, and then I've lost this opportunity to make one moment much bigger. Thank you.
Yeah, I really like that, Deborah, because you started off talking about the heat and the fire, and then that pow, there's one part, I don't know if it's in this chapter or not, but in terms of the intensity of the heat and the suffering, he says at some point that there's a transformation into illumination, where that's where the heart of intimacy really opens up, and we're free to just share that light and that intensity. And there's no more fear of the consequence, there's no more attachment to the outcome of that. It's just because it's always expressing itself and showing itself. Yeah. So thanks.
Hey, thank you. And there's one other thing I wanted to add, because I had, some time ago, paraphrased Rev about when I visited him and he pulled out the picture of the monk who was sitting in the fire. And I'm glad that this came back because I thought about that too. Like, this is the context in which one sits upright. It is not self-immolation or suicide or any of these cultural mores that we attach to what we see as the outside. It is the intimacy of being in and with fire. And to me, that is the height of nobility and potency. And also, one other thing, just real quick, that I learned from Red that is still part of my practice. He said to me, he said, or I can't remember, it was all of us, but I felt like it was just me. When you bow, and your head touches the floor, you leave the world. So you take that breath, whether it's an exhale or an inhale, and as you come back up, you enter back into the world. But that protection from the fire, when the head touches the floor, and back to your poem at the beginning, the earth receives the heat, and I am freed of suffering. Because if I am not freed of suffering, I have to get back into the world, and now I'm just burnt out. So that is, I love to bow and touch the floor because the earth takes it away. And it is a cloak of water and honestly, I've never bowed the same again after.
Beautiful. Wow.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning again, everyone. The word that's coming up for me more than patience right now is compassion, because as I read this chapter, I was thinking of all the ways I failed at being patient. I really have not passed that course either, Doc. I'm so impatient. I'm impatient with my mom. She's here with me now. I'm impatient with so many other things. And I'm listening to this neuroscientist, talking about how you build pathways, and I'm saying, I'm a bad Buddhist or a failed Buddhist because I'm so impatient, and so I'm remembering to be compassionate with my impatience. So thankful for this practice, but yeah, that's it. Being impatient and wondering how long is it this pathway of this practice is gonna take to build this pathway in my brain to be a good Buddha.
Hmm.
I was noticing that I was getting impatient waiting for the talk to begin. And, I try to understand what everybody is saying, and I don't. Like, I'm not sure if Deb felt she was burning up in the culture that we have, what you call the grind culture, and that the grind culture wears a person down. And that's how I see it. And they need to be renewed. And this culture is so impatient, fast foods. I mean, just the way people drive, they have to get a foot in front of you, I'm not cut out for this world. That's all I can say. I've had difficulty in negotiating it, and but I see my own impatience, and I don't know if it makes me a good Buddha or not, or a Bodhisattva. At some point, I just wanna, what Tom said, I love seeing people being nice. I love seeing people smiling at each other and recognizing that the other person exists. They're so into their own worlds with their devices, they don't even know they're there, you're there. They're just, you go into a doctor's office, they're all sitting on their phones or their tablets. And I just love to see human beings smile and contact each other. For several years, I was very into apes, and that developed out of a course that I had at San Francisco State, communication with other animals. And I developed a relationship with these people at the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, who were there visiting this gorilla, Kundu, who was this, he was like this godlike gorilla, and he had fans, and I was one of them. And that was meaningful to me being there for those couple of years with Kunju and these people. And I can't tell you if that was a state of nirvana. I'm not sure what it means to be intimate. I don't know what does that really mean. But I felt I was intimate at the zoo with the people in Kunju. Thank you. What does it mean to be intimate? How is that? Can you explain that?
I was thinking about it. Someone asked me that because I was going to give a similar talk tonight in another group. One of the things you learn is life's easier if you can double up on your Dharma talks. You know, it's easier that way. But let me read this poem I was going to read. I think it might answer the question. It's called Kindness. Like a mother's love for her newborn child, the most important thing in life is a soft, open heart that knows from beyond the confines of the mind that the universe is made of loving kindness. A great master was once asked, there are so many extraordinary spiritual experiences reported by so many people. How can we know which ones are actually real? He replied, you will know when it's perfectly clear to you that the immutable foundation of the experience is kindness. So I guess what that means for me is like, you know, like the current in the ocean, it's like the activity of the water is the current. So our experience of loving kindness is the reflection of our oneness of being water with all beings, you know.
And that's intimacy.
Yeah, closer than close. So it's too close. It's so close we don't pay attention to it enough.
Thank you.
That was my meta. So that was the meta.
Donna, this conversation this morning with all six of us is intimacy, right here, right now. This is it right here.
Yeah.
You're experiencing it at this second.
I see.
I would like to also add, Donna, that I hope some of the interactions that we have had are comparable to Kundun experiences, because they have been for me. They have been intimate, and you know, Mitch used to always say, quoting somebody famous, "Not knowing is most intimate." So for me, you are a very intimate person, and I've been brought to like extraordinary levels of intimacy in my interactions with you. So I just want to thank you for that. And I hope I can rank in there with Kundun someday.
Yeah. Kunju moved to Denver because they had a much bigger zoo, Lincoln Park's area, and he needed area. But what it did for me is make me realize we've got to preserve the natural world for other beings. That is paramount. We're not the only ones here, the humankind.
And I was struck when you were talking, by looking at everybody else's faces when you talk, and by their movements and their smiles and by their rapt attention, intimacy. I mean, we're there with us, and you're here with us, and in a place that doesn't even require words. Actually, I mean, from my standpoint, doesn't require words. That the words get in the way. I think actually with intimacy, and I think there are different levels of intimacy and different intensities. I shouldn't say levels, but intensities emotion experience with it. And you're a very emotional person and a very expressive person, and you demand intimacy. It arises when you express. It arises. Any other comments before we continue? Roger, your preference on your meta?
Well, I feel like I've done 2 metas, but I could do another one. Does anybody else have one?
You know, I found a poem yesterday that I think might fit if you're willing to entertain a very short poem with that. And it's called Hymn, Hymn, by Marie Howe. It began as an almost inaudible hum, low and long, for the solar winds and far dim galaxies. A hymn growing louder for the moon and the sun, a song without words for the snow falling, for snow conceiving snow. Summits in praise for the rocky faults and crust and crevices, then down to the roots and rocks and burrows, the lake's skittery surfaces, wells, oceans breaking. Waves, the salt deep, the warm bodies moving within it, the cold deep, the deep underneath gleaming, some of us rising as the planet turned into dawn, some lying down as it turned into dark, as each of us rested. Another woke, standing among the cast-off cartons and automobiles. We left the factories and stood in the parking lots, left the subways and stood on sidewalks, in the bright offices, in the cluttered yards, in the farmed fields, in the mud of the shanty towns, breaking into harmonies we'd not known possible, finding the chords as we found our true place, singing in a million keys, the human hymn of praise for every something else there is, and ever was, and will be, the song growing louder and rising. Listen, I too believed it was a dream.
Okay. Yeah, also I was just that's beautiful. Also, it's Buddha's birthday today and there's an eclipse, so maybe we'll get to see some of it.
For Buddha and Kundra.
Yeah.